and welcome to our daily Facebook Live update. Welcome to Monday the 18th of May. My name's Bronwyn Pearson for those who haven't met me before, and I'm from Pinnacle People Solutions. Our organisation specialises in supporting regionally based small to medium sized businesses and not-for-profit organisations with everything to do with their staffing. Any and all aspects of HR advice, support and services we can help you with. So we're here to help. We've been this is our 10th week of doing Facebook daily live streams. We are here at 9:15 every weekday with updates on new information as it comes to hand in the previous sort of 24, or in this case 72 hours with the weekend, and more detailed information about topics related to staffing and business management, particularly as it's impacting business owners and their staff and managers, etc. during this COVID time. Good morning, everybody who's joining us this morning. Delightful to see you. Good morning, Gretel. I'd also like to say this Monday, the 18th of May, a special shout out to Robert Bucksarth and also John Dodd, who have their birthdays today. Very loved members of our family, and just wanting to wish them a very happy day today. So please ask any questions that you might have as we go along on today's live stream. Pop them up there in the comments, send us a private message. We will do our very best to answer those as we go along. Otherwise, I might need to take them on notice and get back to you tomorrow. So outside of this, of course, you can contact us, that being myself and my splendiferous team, on a range of different means. So Facebook, email, telephone, all of those details. I'm sure the contact information is going to go up in the comments with my lovely team in just one moment. So look for those. The live streams are also recorded and they're available afterwards up in Facebook, but also on our YouTube channel, in LinkedIn and on our website. So we'd really encourage you to share them with your colleagues and friends, and give us feedback on any topics that you might like to see more information on, as well as questions that you might have for us. So breaking news, big changes that have been announced since last Friday, the 15th of May. The first I already mentioned last Friday, but I mention it again because it's really significant, and that is that there have been changes to workers' compensation legislation in New South Wales effective last Wednesday, the 13th of May, and that is to ensure that nurses, paramedics, teachers and other essential workers, and I'll broaden that definition in just a moment, will no longer have to prove they were infected with COVID-19 at work to make a workers' compensation claim. So staff working in industries including health, education, hospitality, entertainment, construction and retail will no longer have to prove that they were not infected with the virus at the shops or elsewhere in the community in order to make a workers' compensation claim for COVID-19. So that's really important to be really well aware of. If you have a business in any of those sectors, or you're not sure whether maybe your business might be covered by those categories, get in touch with us and we can certainly help you with that. It does mean, though, that for businesses within those sectors that workers' compensation claims for COVID won't have to be proved to have come from the work environment in order to be accepted. That's not going to impact you too much if you're a small business with a workers' compensation premium bill of under $30,000 per annum. But if your bill is over that, it will, any time lost from the work environment for any staff who make workers' compensation claims, whatever they might be for, will impact your premium if your premium's over $30,000. So talk to us if you need any further advice in respect of that. So the other thing that the government have followed up with, well, the federal government has followed up with, obviously the workers' compensation changes I've referred to are just in New South Wales at this point. The federal government followed up on Saturday announcing an $80 million infection control training program for staff in customer-facing roles. So important news for business owners, managers and staff in any customer-facing roles. There will be a nationally recognised skills certification that will be available to about 80,000 workers across retail, food handling, as well as transport and logistics. So in those instances, workers will pay no fee or a small fee for training, previously only widely available in the health sector. So this infection control training program is going to be rolled out and available at little to no cost. So we will get you further information about that as soon as we can, but that was announced on Saturday. I would strongly advise that if you've got a business in retail, food handling and transport and logistics, that you get onto that and organise for your staff to receive training. The other thing that the government announced, this was on Friday afternoon, is that this was following the last meeting of the National Cabinet, which was on Friday, that it would commit just over $48 million in additional support for the implementation of its new mental health and wellbeing plan. There is a real concern, as there should be, around the mental health implications for the COVID pandemic. The Health Minister has said that of that 48 million, just over 7 would be allocated for research, 29.5 for outreach to vulnerable communities, and 11.3 for communication and other outreach programs. So despite the fact that that mental health services are being accessed in much higher numbers, for example, comparably to last year, there are still gaps, and which is where the mental health and wellbeing pandemic plan is designed to come in. The first gap that they're looking to address is data collection. And the second is where people have been disconnected from mental health services, trying to re-engage those people. And thirdly, that when you come into a service or go to use a service, whatever way you might come into that service, you can access what you actually need. So the pathways for getting to mental health services are going to be streamlined and made more easy for those needing it. So that was a very important announcement. The other thing that the Prime Minister and National Cabinet announced on Friday was that they've agreed to resume all elective surgeries, but the speed at which this happens will depend on states and territories and their own determinations around that. So we'll keep you informed about that. On Friday, the Prime Minister was also asked, importantly, 2 questions regarding whether free childcare would be extended beyond the June 30 end date, as well as whether a similar extension for the JobKeeper wage subsidy, which is due to end, I think it's on the 27th or 28th of September, could be on the cards or not. Apparently the Federal Education Minister is in the process of considering the question of whether there would be an extension to free childcare beyond the 30th of June, and that he did reiterate, the Prime Minister, that is, that free childcare was put in place as a temporary measure because it's not viable in the long term, and that no decisions on free childcare had been made, but the intention always was to return to the payment arrangements and subsidy arrangements that had been in place prior to those temporary changes to free childcare coming into effect. Similarly, for the JobKeeper wage subsidy, the Prime Minister has said that it was initially estimated that about 6 million Australians would be supported by the program. That's now closer to 6.1. So there's already been an exceeding of estimates. The Prime Minister said that because they're only 7 weeks into the program, it would be speculative to consider anything other than the time frame that has already been set out, so to conclude on the 27th of September. In terms of domestic travel in Australia, there is a goal or an idea that we might be able to travel domestically and move around the country more widely as early as July, but that's just a suggestion at this stage. Obviously the government's mindful of the fact that we've got school holidays coming up in July, and what the net tourism value is to Australia. But that will remain to be seen whether that happens in July. Certainly, it's on the deck for consideration. So watch this space. All right. So our topic today is we're heading back a little bit towards the end of March. We talked about working remotely. And the fact of the matter is that from the time that businesses started to put this in place where they were able to, we're effectively about 2 months in. And so we thought it would be timely to be asking the question, do you know how it's going? If you've implemented working from home or working remotely in your business, do you know how that's going? And what are the consequences, the risks and the opportunities for your business and your staff now that we're 2 months in? And hopefully you might know more about how that's all going for you and for your business and for your staff. So interestingly, last week, the public health orders that were issued last week continue to direct employers to permit staff to work from home where possible. So we still have that, and it's still something that is expected to be the sort of baseline expectation for stages 1 and 2 of the 3-stage sort of framework for easing restrictions that the National Cabinet announced a week ago. So the fact of the matter remains that as employers, we have a duty to eliminate or minimise as far as we reasonably practicably can the risks arising from exposure to COVID-19. So physical distancing in combination with good hygiene and cleaning practices are obviously effective ways to reduce the likelihood of exposure to COVID-19. But we need to be incredibly careful and reminded that no matter where our staff are working for our companies, they are doing so under the work health and safety legislation, and we are asking them and permitting them to do that and to continue to be responsible for their wellness, health and safety at work, wherever that work happens to be being undertaken. So it's incredibly important 2 months on to be still talking to your staff about physical distancing, about good hygiene, about other effective ways to reduce the likelihood of exposure to COVID-19 wherever your staff are working with and for you. There's been some interesting, I guess, reflections on the fact of the 3-stage sort of easing of restrictions having been announced by National Cabinet. And that is the reality that in preparing for us to be able to go back to workplaces that we originated from, potentially, so offices and the like. I think one of the things that business owners, managers, staff, less so politicians at this point, but we'll see if they catch up, are beginning to realise just how much COVID-19 already has changed the way we work. And it's not just Zoom meetings, potentially a bit of a sleep in if you don't have a commute, and casual dress sometimes. It's also how we want to do our jobs too, moving forward. And it's interesting from our perspective as HR advisors to see that working from home is no longer the elephant in the room that it was for a lot of businesses, and that brings opportunities, but it also brings risks. Which is why I think it's timely to be asking the question, 2 months after this sort of really hit as a thing that businesses started to frantically do, that is working remotely, just to see how much do you know about how it's going for your business and what are the likely things that you should be paying attention to. So prior to COVID-19, it won't be a surprise to know that working from home wasn't offered by all businesses, and when it was just given to a few people, usually only for specific reasons like lack of childcare options. But interestingly, according to McCrindle research, 78% of us want the option to work from home. Would be interesting to do some further research on that when, sorry, I'll turn that, I didn't realise the phone was still on, to see what that figure looks like after we've moved through and out the other side of this pandemic. So essentially, if you work from home, if any of your staff work from home before the pandemic, regularly or on occasion, you're pretty special. Certainly not a whole holistic thing. But in March, obviously, organisations were forced to act, and many have invested heavily in technology, enabling this to occur, expecting that they might need to for the rest of the year. So when the Prime Minister first came out and first restrictions were put in place, the pandemic was called, etc., public health orders started to be made, the Prime Minister was talking 6 months. So businesses were preparing for, essentially to be conservative for the remainder of the year. What that means is that a lot of businesses, my own included, and I'm sure many who are listening to this or who are employed by businesses, now have their own case studies and the capability to continue to work from home. So that begs the question, to what extent will working from home continue to be a feature of the way that you do business? And there are some elements of that you can choose as business owners. There are going to be other elements where you may have less choice than you had before, and let me explain why. A lot of organisations are now expecting that working from home will become a permanent reality, given the research that's been done to demonstrate that there is a strong support amongst staff for the options. I think it's also revealed to businesses that many people can work effectively without being in the office, and that it's likely that working from home will automatically be included for most businesses going forward as an option, if not as a permanent feature. And this is because we now know that we can work without our manager over our shoulder for the day, but it's also, and again, thus the topic for today, we're 2 months in, how's it going? How do you know how it's going? Is that not all staff have found this a positive thing. Some definitely, others not so much. And so like anything, there's pros and there's cons, and it's worthwhile going back and having a look at those. So in terms of, let's just do a quick recap of the things that you must be doing before we get into how's it going. So several things that you must be doing if you've got staff working remotely, whether that's in their home environment or wherever it might happen to be. Your obligation as the employer is to provide as much infrastructure and equipment for your staff as you can, as would be reasonable for the size and so forth of your business. It's really important to be focused on cybersecurity as much as you can, and that's, that would be prepping computers, mobile phones, Wi-Fi networks, etc. appropriately. We've got checklists on our website. Just a reminder about that. So go up and feel free to download those to assist you. It's really important that if you're not already aware, and some small to medium businesses are not, in our experience, but you must be really aware of the terms and conditions that your staff are employed under, both in respect of any employment contract that is in place, as well as if they're employed under a modern award. And that would include things like span of hours, breaks, rosters, allowances, overtime, all of those sorts of things. Of course, what's come into place since we started working from home for some businesses is the JobKeeper wage subsidy, the changes to the Fair Work Act around JobKeeper enabling directions, which includes being able to direct staff around their location of work. So those, I'm not going to get into that level of detail again now, but talk to us if you've got questions in respect of that. Okay, so the other thing that you should have in place is regular communication mechanisms. Incredibly important. We don't want staff to have to feel like they have to be on camera or on the phone with you 24/7. But you do need to be touching base regularly, because it can be incredibly isolating to be working away from what you used to in terms of your normal work environment. You need to be encouraging your staff to get up and move every 30 minutes and take their regular break entitlements. It can be very difficult to set boundaries for work and home in a working at home environment, particularly for those staff who, as parents of school-aged children, have had to accommodate homeschooling into that mix as well. Living nightmare for some, as I know it's been, and continues to be while school is gradually getting back. So it's incredibly difficult to have those boundaries. Our consultant psychologist Jessica did a wonderful one of her wonderful Tuesday presentations on setting boundaries when you're working at home. So I'd encourage you to go back through our archive and have a look at that. It's got some great tips in there. So you need to be talking to your staff regularly, as I said, in particular for those who you need to work from home or remotely, who also have children to care for there. So that's it's incredibly important. Now, there's lots of different reasons why you need to care about this issue and making sure that you have all of these must-dos in place. If you don't have them all in place, and we're 2 months in, it's incredibly important that you get those things in place. The fundamental reason why you need to care about this is that you are responsible. As the business owners and managers, you have lawful responsibilities, ethical and moral as well, of course, for the health and safety of your staff, no matter where they're working from you. And that includes if they're working from home, and it also includes if they get COVID-19 while working for you from home. I'll let that sink in for a moment. So if any staff were to get an injury or an illness as a consequence of working in the course of doing their duties for you, as in working from home, then that's a workers' compensation claim potentially for you. So this is a level of awareness that we need to make sure that businesses have, and to make sure that you've got the appropriate things in place. So if, as we talked about last week when we were looking at health and safety obligations more broadly, particularly for those businesses who might be starting to map a return to the office, each business is going to have to look very carefully at what they're doing and look at the guidance being provided, and then decide how it applies to your business. And of course, with any and all of these things, we can help you. So don't hesitate to get in touch if you need to know how this is all going to apply to your particular circumstances, your staff, your business. Where people are going to start resuming coming into work, it's about making sure that not everybody is in there at the same time if you don't have adequate space. Because the last thing you need is crowding in the areas where people come in and out of the business. Staggered starts, which we've helped a lot of businesses to put in place a couple of months ago, and they're still doing. Staggered starts, flexible work arrangements have been recommended, as well as continuing to have staff work remotely, as I mentioned, where that's possible. So, and the fact of the matter is that staff working away from normal office sites temporarily or in staggered shifts, etc., is going to be the case for the foreseeable future. So the measures that are put in place are probably going to be measures that we need to keep in place for many, many months. So social distancing in your physical workspace, having all of the hand hygiene and sanitation processes, daily cleaning, disinfected cleaning. So any of you that have businesses that have had hot desking or open plan offices, shared kitchens, crowded lifts potentially, they're just some of the hazards that we're going to have to eliminate if we're to comply with the federal government's COVID Safe Plan for workplaces. And again, I mentioned last week, Safe Work Australia has some fantastic resources and is the source of information that the federal government and National Cabinet have chosen to distribute information and resources to businesses during the COVID period. So get up there and have a look at what's available for you up there. There are many reasons staff were justified to continue working from home. even though there's been a slightly open door to businesses starting to return to workplaces, including the fear of contracting COVID-19 in the office or a lack of childcare. Others might be reluctant to get back on public transport, for any of you in areas where there is public transport. It's also possible that a refusal to return to the office by any of your staff could be considered reasonable, particularly if that staff member or anybody they live with is in a high risk category for COVID-19. So you need to be prepared to cope with questions and concerns by staff to actually be coming back into an office environment. So some of the benefits, obviously, have, what we've seen since March with a lot of businesses taking the decision to work remotely, has put a lot of us into home offices with video calls and very little human contact outside of those who might share our household. People have generally, though, responded really well to those changing circumstances. Businesses are embracing the change. Staff are enjoying extra time they don't have to actually spend travelling to and from work. There's also savings in terms of transport, petrol, parking fees, buying lunches, all of those sorts of things. There's also fewer distractions sometimes, not always, sometimes, in terms of, chatty co-workers at neighbouring desks, a more relaxed work environment where you can work more comfortably potentially. You can also combine it with taking the dog for a walk at lunchtime, doing a bit of gardening at lunchtime. It can also open up more time to spend with family and friends, bearing in mind social distancing regulations, of course. Look, from a business perspective, having staff work at home or remotely can also mean quite a bit of savings. So we've had a lot of business owners asking us, cogitating on the question of, well, why the hell do we need the kind of office space that we've had? Because, this has proven so far to be working quite well. So fewer staff in the office can mean fewer overheads, electricity, internet, rent. You may be able to downgrade to a smaller and more affordable space. You could also be saving on office supplies and furniture. Not to mention, obviously, less travel is better, as the world has demonstrated, for the environment. And if your employees are working from home advocates, then potentially they're happier in the process too. So, look, I think that a lot of businesses this 2 months in are seeing the advantages of working from home and the ability to downsize offices potentially and money saving potentials. Of course, with positives, there's also downsides, and we shouldn't neglect those either, because some employees have found working from home particularly difficult and really look forward to returning to the office. There's staff who really enjoy having a very distinctly separate work life from home life, and the combination of those two under the same roof has been incredibly challenging. Our more extroverted employees who really enjoy to have people around them and activity and energy are finding that working from home is a real struggle. Working parents are the ones, not surprisingly, who are struggling the most. And if you've got any team members like I do, with dependent kids who've been home and needing supervision and homeschooling and those things at the same time as your staff are trying to work, talk to them frequently and often, because it's a real struggle. Balancing homeschooling and the pressure of a normal working day is really challenging. Consequently, some parents' days have become incredibly long and have involved very little time for winding down, which in turn is going to have an impact on mental health and stress levels. So that's incredibly important to consider. The other is that one of the downsides of trying to combine homeschooling and work is a lack of calm. And also the lack of an adult interaction in potentially a tidy environment that they don't have to worry about. So a productive team environment like you might have had in an office space or a collective space is difficult to replicate, and it's challenging to manage staff remotely as well. You have to be really, if you're a manager or a business owner, you have to be acutely aware of what's happening, and you should be acutely aware. So one of the questions, do you know how it's going, is that you should do. And communicating with your staff frequently and often is one of the ways to do that. Look, staff working from home can also struggle with motivation sometimes, distractions, as well as solitude. So there can be angst about technology, emotional stress of getting everything set up and getting to work on time. Poor quality video calls are not a substitute for face-to-face meetings, and a lot of staff are missing the social interaction and connection with colleagues that would be different in their collective workspace. So others love working by themselves. And I think there might be a mixed way of working in the future that we are already talking about navigating with a range of different business owners. For business owners, so any of you that are listening into this will find that you might also have concerns around managing productivity, time, accountability, cybersecurity. But I do think that we're already seeing a shift where traditional work environments will embrace remote working with much more post-COVID-19 as a consequence of this experience. We now know that remote working can work, and this won't be the first pandemic or emergency that we have to deal with where our businesses suddenly have to decamp. So the traditional office will need to evolve and has been evolving to include remote workers who see the office as a base rather than their only place of work. So I think those things are incredibly important. So asking that question, we're 2 months down the track since there was a bit of a wholesale move to working remotely. How is that going for you and your staff? All of these things we've talked about this morning should be signals to how you should know how it's going. And it's incredibly important that you know how it's going because amongst other things, as we talked about last week in the work health and safety sessions that we did, you've got incredible responsibilities and potential risks. One of those I foreshadowed at the beginning of this session this morning, and that is that if you've been working remotely during COVID in part or in full, then you've now got a case study and a capacity to demonstrate that working from home can work. What that also means is that there are consequences for the ways in which our workplaces have changed. I've talked about some of the positives and some of the downsides, but one of them is that working from home or working remotely from the base location for work is the kind of flexible working arrangement that staff members can request under the Fair Work Act. And it's important for you as employers to know and be reminded about this, because there are certain categories of staff who have a right to request flexible working from their employer. If they've worked with you for at least 12 months, they can actually request flexible working arrangements, and I'm going to give you those categories in just a moment of which staff can request those flexible working arrangements. And in the event that they do, the reverse onus of proof is there. So it's on you as the business owner to actually demonstrate why you can't accommodate a flexible working arrangement. So bearing that in mind, given that we've now had 2 months of a lot of businesses working remotely and working in ways different to how they would normally work, there's a reasonable expectation that some of your staff, particularly if they can't fall into these categories I'm about to tell you about, might come and ask you for a flexible work arrangement to continue working in ways that they might have had to temporarily during COVID. So those employees can be anybody who is a parent or has responsibility for the care of a child who is school-aged or younger. They are a carer under the Carer Recognition Act 2010. They have a disability. Now, whether that's a temporary or a permanent disability, it doesn't matter. They have a disability. They are 55 years of age or older. They are experiencing family or domestic violence, or they provide care or support to a member of their household or immediate family who requires care and support because of family or domestic violence. So those are the categories of staff who can legitimately, under the Fair Work Act, request a flexible working arrangement. And the situation that a lot of employers are now in is that you have a case study for how remote working and flexible working, whatever you've put in place over this period of COVID and continue to do for the foreseeable number of months until we have businesses completely open again, is something that you need to be really well aware of. Can I require my staff to work remotely is a question that we've had a number of times over recent months. The answer is yes. You are responsible for your staff health and safety wherever they are at work for you. And in fact, you now have, if you're JobKeeper eligible, your business is, and you've got staff who are JobKeeper eligible, any of those staff can be issued a JobKeeper enabling direction after consultation, requiring them to work in a different location to where they would normally work. If you can still have that negotiated outcome with a staff member with agreement, irrespective of JobKeeper. The other question that we had early on, particularly, less so now, but my boss says I can't work from home, but I'm worried about my health and safety in the workplace and want to follow the government's guidelines that work should be done at home if at all possible. The answer to that is you can, as a staff member, legitimately refuse to work in the office or at the workplace if you believe doing so puts you at an unacceptable level of risk to your health and safety or the health and safety of any high-risk people that you might live with. If you're an employee who has this question, or you're an employer who has a staff member who's raising this question, get in touch with us and we'll talk you through how to handle that. It's incredibly important, we're 2 months in, but it's never too late to make sure that you have your appropriate policies in place. If you don't have them already and you're working in flexible and different ways to normal, even if you're working as normal, you should still have appropriate policy in place. So those things at the moment for workplaces that are working remotely or flexibly is a working remotely policy, a working remotely checklist, an ergonomic checklist, a mental health policy, and a work health and safety policy. They're the things at minimum that you should have in place. You should know that your staff are set up appropriately to work remotely, equipment, connections, furniture. You would have had, ideally, particularly if you checked in with us back in March, had your staff complete the working remotely checklist, and including taking photos of their workplace working remotely. You should actually be getting them to do that again. And asking them how things are going and if anything has substantively changed. You should know this anyway if you're having daily contact with your staff and helping and supporting them through any changes to their location that you need to support them with. It's also really important to make sure that all of your staff are completing timesheets and that you're communicating with them regularly and often. This is absolutely critical. We are always here to help. So contact us anytime. Our lovely staff have put those details in the comments section of today's live stream. So get advice. These are the things, practical realities that I would share with you. Get advice and plan. Have good, robust infrastructure in place in terms of employment contracts, position descriptions, good relevant policy and procedure for working remotely. Communicate frequently and regularly with your staff, and be vigilant. Incredibly important. If you can't answer the question, how's it all going? And you don't know intimately how it's going with every member of your team relative to how you've needed to transition to do work in different ways during COVID and how you might continue to do that moving forward, then you really need to know and talk to us, and we can make sure that you've got all of those ducks in a row and you know what's happening. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's always delightful to have you on board and part of this process. If you have specific questions as they might relate to your business, or you want us to help you out in any way, we are absolutely available to do that. So contact us anytime on the contact details our staff have given you in the communication link here. Tomorrow, being Tuesday, our wonderful consultant psychologist Jessica will be taking us through employee assistance programs and how they can help your business and staff. So please join us. Invite your colleagues and your friends to join us as well. If you do happen to miss any of these, as I said, don't worry. They're up in Facebook, on our YouTube channel, in LinkedIn, and also on our website, so you can always catch up. In the meantime, please go ahead and hug the people that you're allowed to. Wave cheerily at those that you can't at this point in time. Stay safe. Stay home unless you really need to be out and about. Wash your hands, and we'll really look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.